Welcome to the Common Sense Show today, and we have the sales training that you never knew you needed, but you absolutely needed in your life to level up your business, to add multiple six and seven figures to your bottom line. I have a world-renowned sales trainer, Jeremy Miner, who is here with me today. I can't wait to touch in to really put my fingers on the pulse of this sales method. He has a sales method called NEPQ. We're going to explain what that means and define how that's better than a normal and a traditional, I shouldn't say normal, but traditional sales model. I'm excited to discover that with him today. Jeremy has helped over 390,000 salespeople in 37 countries over the last 3 years to help 3, 5, and even 10x their sales results. And so if you're looking to increase your sales, then this is the show for you today. All right, so just hang right here. I want to get Jeremy in 2 seconds. Jeremy, welcome to the Common Sense Show. I just gave you a little bit of an introduction, but that doesn't do you anywhere near the justice that you need to be at. And I was wondering if you could just tell the individuals who are watching and listening a little bit about your company, Seventh Level.
Well, what would you like to know, Micah?
Yeah, so you're the founder and chairman of Seventh Level. So we should.
I am. However, now you probably got an old document. So I am no longer the chairman. I was actually stripped of that title about 3 weeks ago. I'm only the founder. I started Seventh Level 4 years ago. I was like the CEO and basically everything, because when you start a company, it's basically you and that's about it. It was me and my assistant, right, that I took over for my job after I retired. And I was the CEO, chairman, president, whatever, probably marketing director, salesperson, everything. And then as the company has grown and grown and grown, we have about a little bit over 140 employees now at this point, 4 years later. I'm no longer, I stepped down as a CEO about 2 years ago. And then about 3 weeks ago, I had to step down as the chairman. They're like, you don't do what chairmans do. Like chairmans organize board meetings and stuff. Like we have to bring in a real chairman. So now I'm just the founder, man. That's it. I have nothing, just the founder, just the boring guy.
Lovely. Because you can't use a calendar. Now you're just the founder.
I don't know. They're like, hey, we have a real company now. We got 140 some people here. You got to have a real chairman. We got to have a real board of directors. Got to do the whole thing. So, now I'm just the founder guy. It's just the methodology. It's just me, it's just me, the founder, and everybody else. There you go. Running the show.
So let's start at the beginning and end at the end. Why did you start Seventh Level? What made you even get into sales training? Why is that a thing for you?
Well, I had a lot of people would say I had somewhat of a successful sales career. I was ranked, I can't remember the rankings. You might have read it was like 44th or 45th in the entire world by a company that ranks salespeople as far as what they make in both B2C and B2B. This is in any industry. Out of over 100 some million salespeople, I was ranked number 44th or 45th in the world as a top incomer. I was making multiple seven figures a year in commissions as a W-2 rep or 1099 rep. So did exceptionally well. I was in 4 different industries, 2 B2C, 2 B2B. So I kind of know both like the back of my hand. And then in 2018, I had a pretty successful career, made some money, invested it well, and I retired. Now, took about a year off, started getting really bored, I would say, Micah. And I started seeing all these ads on Instagram and Facebook and social media from the sales gurus talking about, you got to do this, and this is how you should sell and all this. And I would look at their stuff and I'm like, I'm sitting here thinking from my position and my success that I had as a rep, if I had listened to that advice, if I had sold that way, if I had been really aggressive and pushy or, consultative, my income would have been about 90% less. And I'm like, there's all these salespeople out there. There's all these companies who just don't know what they don't know. And they keep selling certain ways because they don't know anything else is out there. They don't know how to work with human behavior. They're using techniques that trigger sales resistance that are causing the very objections that they don't like from their prospects. All right. So I'm like, what are we going to do about it? You got to do something. So I locked myself in a cave, in my man cave, for about 6 months. And I wrote the first version of what is now called NEPQ 2.0 or 2.0 training platform. It took me about 6 months to write it, launched it in 2018, and then just, kind of the rest is history there. That's how it all started.
So I want to go back even further.
Yeah.
Because most podcasts go back to the beginning of sales. I want to go back even further than that.
Okay.
Are you naturally a salesperson? Were you? I'm not saying, oh, were you born a sales guy? But was this part of your original framework for how you thought as a person prior to getting into sales, or were you brought into it by like a friend who said, "Hey, let's do this"? You discovered yourself in sales.
Yeah.
You even
And unfortunately,
to the level where you can actually sell people.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. Like nobody's born in sales. Like one of the biggest. Let's talk about that first, because that's a huge myth that so many salespeople buy into, especially people who don't succeed in sales, because then they start to view themselves like, I wasn't a born salesperson. I want to make sure everybody understands. No one is born out of their mother's womb with advanced questioning skills. Anybody on here listening born out of your mother's womb with advanced questioning skills? Probably unlikely. I wasn't born out of my mother's womb as you weren't with advanced tonality skills. I wasn't born out of my mother's womb with advanced objection prevention and handling skills. Those are skills I had to acquire. I had to learn those skills. Okay, so let's just get it out there. No one is a born salesperson. That is a myth that comes from probably 100 years ago of sales trainers keep copying each other's books and it just keeps spitting at each other. There's no evidence. There's no scientific proof. There's no case studies or documentation that says certain people are born as salespeople and other people are not born as salespeople. That does not exist. Okay. It's all an acquired skill. So I didn't, like most people that probably got into sales, I didn't probably grow up as a kid, but like, oh my gosh, when I turn 18, I'm really hoping to get into a professional sales career. It just kind of happened. So I was going to school with a 21-year-old kid. My roommate came in and they're like, hey, there's a meeting up here at the college and you can get a job selling home security systems. I still remember what he said. You sell them for free and you make all this money. And I'm like, I didn't register. Like, how do you sell them for free and make all this money? And I was a 21-year-old kid and they're like, it's pizza. Pizza's involved. So I'm like, I'm in. So I remember going there. There's probably a group of 60 to 70 of us in there. And guess how many of those people they hired? Everybody. Everybody gets hired because it's straight commissioned, right? So if you don't sell, then you don't make, it's no skin off their back. So everybody gets hired. Basically, it's a summer program. I was going to school out in Utah, and they're really big in summer programs for like pest control, home security systems, just different things like that. Okay. And so basically, they give you a script, and there's more to it. They give you a couple of scripts. They give you some books by what I call the old sales gurus, and they drive you out in a van and basically kick you out of the van and say, hey, go make some sales. We'll pick you up after dark. It's going to be easy. That was my first experience about how I got into selling. Now, quickly I realized, Micah, that what the company was saying to me, like, be really excited when you knock on the door, show them how much you believe in the product and they're going to believe in it and they're going to want to buy. And I'm like, that makes sense. If I believe in it, if I tell them how awesome it is and we're the number one this and we have the best that, somehow they're just going to believe that. I just thought it was the case. So I started knocking on doors, talking about the features and benefits and how we had the greatest this and we had the number one this and we could help them with this. And I started noticing, like you're probably going to guess from the very first door, that I was getting a lot of objections. We don't need it. We can't afford it, Jeremy. Your price is too high. We already talked with somebody from your company. I need to do more research. I need to talk with my spouse. I need to think it over. Can you call me back a week, a month, a year later? And I remember getting to a place probably about 7-8 weeks into nonstop, all that rejection, right? I actually remember the time I was at a keynote talking about this last week up in Utah. And I remember standing on a curve. It was like on a weekend, it was like probably Friday, Saturday night, waiting to get picked up. I had made 0 sales that day. I'd worked 12 hours. So that means I made $0, right? Straight commission, 0 sales, $0. In fact, that entire week, I still remember I made 0 sales, made $0. And I remember standing there thinking to myself, maybe selling just wasn't for me. If anybody's on here, have you ever felt that way yourself? Like maybe selling just wasn't for me. I was like, I wasn't born a salesperson like all these other guys that are doing really good in the office. Maybe I should just get a real job. And I remember getting into the van that night because they pick you up in a van, the manager, and he popped in a Tony Robbins CD. Remember like 22 years ago, people listening to those round things like CDs, And so, you know what I mean? So Tony said something like this. I could be butchering it, but he said, He said something to the point that you will fail for the simple reason you don't learn the right skills necessary to succeed. You will fail if you don't learn the right skills. Now, he goes on to say, this is quite interesting, that everyone is taught skills. When you get into a professional environment, pretty much everyone is taught skills. But he said the people who fail are the ones who are not taught the right ones. And he started to talk about there was differences in skill level, that some skills were far more effective than other skills. See, I'd never thought about that as a 21-year-old kid, right? What would I know? And so it was like this light bulb moment that maybe what the company was training.
So not to cut you off, but you were 21 at the time then.
Yeah, 21, almost 22, right in that range. I might have turned 22. Right. I mean, just barely. I was in that cutoff. I was like going into my senior year in college, basically.
Right.
And I remember like thinking that, hey, there's a difference in skill level. That there's some skills that are far more effective than others. So I started to think like maybe what the company was training me, what I was learning from what I called the old sales gurus, maybe they just weren't the right skills anymore. Maybe they were just kind of outdated. Maybe they just didn't work as well. That was the first time that ever entered in my mind. Now, at the same time, what was going on in my mind, Micah, is I was in college and I was majoring in behavioral science and human psychology, okay, which is really good if you're in sales, because behavioral science is really, I'm not going to give the scientific terms on this, but it's really the study of the brain. And as a society and as a human being, why do you go left instead of going right by just reading a sign that tells you to do that? Like, why do you do that? Why do you say no instead of saying yes? Like, what is triggered in your brain that causes you to do those things? Decision making. So I was learning from my professor. So have you ever heard of like Robert Cialdini?
I haven't.
Okay, a lot of people have. So he's the head of human behavior studies. He's world renowned. He teaches here at Arizona State University. He's like the head of the whole department. He's written several books, lectures, Persuasion, Influence. But a lot of your audience might have heard that. So I started learning from Professor Cialdini and some other professors that I was studying. Like, you're talking world renowned experts from NYU. This is when online classes just started in the 2000s. So I was like soaking it up from everywhere I could. And they were saying that the most persuasive way to communicate was over here, whereas the sales gurus in their books, they were basically saying it was over here. It was like exactly the opposite. And so it was a huge
dilemma. And so this is I'm just going to break it up a bit. So this is you were noticing that your efforts weren't returning the results.
You could say
when you were doing it.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah.
Especially in a commission-based job, you notice really fast that your efforts are not returning results.
Yeah.
And so you've now graduated and moved into your sales, your career. Are you graduated at this point?
I'm still in college at this point. You're talking about, this is just a couple months into my sales career. So I'm like, here's what the sales gurus are saying. I would notice when I'd use some techniques, they would work. I would make a few sales, but I also noticed a lot of the things they were saying didn't work at all. In fact, when I used them, I would notice I would get even more objections. I would notice that my prospects' walls came up more. I would notice that there was more sales resistance when I would say what they were saying or ask certain questions the way they would say to ask them. So at the same time, from behavioral science, I was saying, how do I take the theory of behavioral science? Okay, because in those books, it's mainly theory, and here's some studies and, a few things you can say in some studies if you change your price points, but there's really no sales structure. There's no, they don't teach in those books, from the point of the sale, you're going to ask this question and here's why it works. If they say this, you're going to say this. There's no point from point A to point Z sales process, like what questions to ask at the right time with the right tone. So that's where I was struggling. So I'm like, how do I take this theory and wrap it into a structured sales process? So I really had to do that because I didn't have much choice, Mike. I was broke. So I had this concept, but I was like, how do I take it in? And that's what I started to do. I started learning questions that would work with human behavior and the right tone that would cause my prospects to pull me in rather than me trying to push. And selling within a few weeks, within a few months, I would say, became actually very, very easy and exceptionally profitable. And that's where the journey started once I started to acquire techniques that actually caused my prospects to let their guard down rather than, wall of resistance that you're trying to compete with the rest of the conversation or process. Make sense? There's a lot more.
The interesting thing.
That's an overview.
Sure. There's an interesting dichotomy between kind of what you're talking about when it comes to, you think that you're fundamentally doing the right thing by
Yeah.
asking them certain kinds of questions, or the way you're structuring how you speak to your prospects.
Yeah.
But really, you're triggering negative activity with them to just essentially reject you and kind of spit you out.
Well,
Um,
yeah, and a lot of it is your tone, Micah. So I'll talk to you. I'll talk to everybody saying, because this really gets overlooked. Because a lot of people are like, oh, tonality is 70% of the sales process, but then that's it. You're like, okay, well, what does that mean? What tone should I have? Like, nobody teaches the right tone, because there's certain parts of your sales process. Okay, certain questions you have to ask in more of a curious tone. John, can you walk me through what you guys do now for that's a curious tone, right? There's other parts of your sales process, other questions that you need to ask in more of a skeptical or challenging tone. Now, you're not going to come in with a skeptical tone in the first 30 seconds of a sales conversation, right? So when do your questions need to be a bit more challenging with the prospect to get them to overcome certain ways of thinking that's allowed the situation to keep happening? Okay, so when do you do that? There's other parts of your sales conversation, other questions you have to ask in more of a concern tone, a tone that shows more empathy. So when do you do that? Okay, so I started learning the different types of tones and when to use those tones in the sales process. And what I started to notice very quickly is my prospects would let their guard down. And when you're selling, imagine selling if most of your prospects you talk to completely had their guard down most of the time. They didn't have the wall up, because the wall of resistance is what crushes salespeople, right? Because the wall comes up early in the conversation because of certain words they're using or their tone. Maybe they come across too excited, too needy, too anxious, right? You know what I mean? Too attached. And it causes the prospect to emotionally shut down, right? And even if you ask really good questions, they do what in return? They give you surface level answers, or they give you generalized or vague answers. And then typically, if you can't get them to open up, what type of objections are you typically used to at the end of your sales process?
what's a normal type of response that would let you in to know that you're actually breaking through that wall that they've put up? How do you um, how do you know that you're getting through to them?
What we train, Micah, is how to keep their guard down the whole time. So we're not necessarily, we're going to train you if you bring the wall up, what to do. But what we're mainly training you at the beginning is how to make sure the wall never comes up. That's what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about using techniques that work with human behavior, so let me give you an example. Let's say that you cold call. I'm just going to throw something out there. Okay. So let's say you cold call and within the first 10 seconds, the prospect throws out an objection like this. Oh yeah. We already use a company for that. Now, how would most salespeople respond if they cold call and the prospect within 15 seconds after you got your little spill out said, oh, hey, we're good. We already use a company for that. In your mind, what would the average salesperson say?
All right. Have a good day.
That, or, well, sir, if, ma'am, if I could have 2 minutes of your time, I can show you how we can help you with click, right? So they start to talk fast. They get nervous, right? Because they heard an objection. And so they start to interject and they sound needy. And then the prospect hangs up quickly, right? So instead, here's a technique to get them to lower their guard down. So their guard's up. That's what you're saying. How do you get them to let their guard up? So if they say in that example, oh, yeah, we're good. We already have a company for that. You simply just agree, oh, yeah, John. And just so you're aware, I'm not quite sure, we could even help you yet. We'd have to understand a little bit more about what you guys are using with XYZ and kind of the results you're getting from that compared to maybe where you're wanting to be, just to see if we can even help, because maybe you're better off staying with the company you're already with. Are you with me on that? Now, why would I say because maybe you're better off staying with the company you're already with? Why would I want to do that?
Well, in my opinion, people are hesitant, resistant, and loss adverse. They don't want to feel like they're losing what they already have. Therefore, they're going to protect what they have initially.
Yeah, because I got to get them to let their guard down, right? So how can I get them to let their guard down if I start arguing with them? How can I get them to let them guard down if I'm like, oh, but sir, if you just give me 2 minutes of your time, I can show you how we can. See, you're arguing. Even though you don't feel like you're arguing, you sound desperate. You sound needy. So I'm going to be detached. So notice what I did there. Oh, yeah, John, and just so you're aware, I'm not quite sure we could even help you yet. See what I just did there? What does that do? See, that little statement there, I'm not quite sure we could even help you yet, takes the sales pressure out of the conversation. Sales pressure is what triggers a human being to go into what's called fight or flight mode. Are you with me? So when they feel pressure, that causes them to resist. So what do I have to do to get them to lower their guard? Remove the pressure. So when I admit that I'm not quite sure I could even help them. Now, I'm not going to say that to a prospect I've been on the phone with 30 minutes, right? But in a cold call, in the first 10 seconds, do I have any credibility or trust with the prospect in the first 30 seconds of a sales conversation? No, because they don't know who I am on a cold call, right? So if you can't get them to let their guard down, the sale is over. Now, do I know I can help them? Yes. But does the prospect know that in the first 20 seconds? No, because you have zero trust or credibility. So my first job is to get them to let their guard down. Now, by the end of that conversation, because of my questionability, my tone, I'm going to help them build a gap in their mind from where they are compared to where they now see they can be, that they feel that they should pay attention to us at that point, that they feel that maybe they should talk with us. Maybe we do have something better, but they don't know that in the first 20 seconds because you don't have any trust or credibility yet. When you get in the conversation, you build that by your questionability, then they become open. But your first job is to get them to let their guard down. So that's just a way to get the prospect to let their guard down by admitting, oh yeah, and John, just so you're aware, I'm not quite sure we can even help you yet. We'd have to know a little bit more about, what you're doing now, like for your systems compared to, and I'm just making something up here, compared to where you're wanting to be, just to see if we can even help, because maybe you're better off staying with the company you already have. Are you opposed to having a brief conversation around that? You always want to use the word opposed in a cold call rather than are you open? Why, in your mind, Micah, why would you want to use are you opposed rather than are you open? Any thoughts?
Well, it hands power back to the salesperson, to the person with whom you're speaking. That's because they're controlling, they're essentially controlling the answer. And the one way you talked about the aggressive salesperson, who's essentially putting a foot in the door jam and not allowing them to close the door, by suggesting that they may be opposed, you're doing a power transfer subtly.
True. It's
back to them.
So the biggest, what is the number one word that humans have been conditioned to say in response to a cold call? The word no, right? Mm-hmm. So when I say, are you opposed? It's hard for a prospect to say, yes, I'm opposed. They already want to say no. So they're like, no, I'm not opposed. What do you have? Watch it. Instead of saying, are you open? Say, are you opposed to having a brief conversation around that? No, I'm not opposed. What do you got? Watch that. Okay. Just a little technique to do that. There's a lot more to that, but that's a way to get a prospect to lower their guard in that type of cold calling situation.
How long did it take you to learn that? 17 years sales career? How far along with you? So we got up to the point where you were striking out, and then you talked about you talked about the legacy salespeople. You talked about the professor, the human behavior professor, whose tactics that you use and leverage into your sales training and understanding behavior.
A lot of professors, wasn't just one, but we're talking about traditional selling techniques compared to techniques that work with human behavior. Big difference there. Yeah.
Right. And so how long did it take you to develop this ability to question using human behavior?
Well, I would say it's still a perfection that we're learning right now. I'd say, I'm a big believer that you're always expanding your knowledge. You're always learning. And I'm even, I would say, let's see, I think from that day that I'd made 0 sales, a year later, I went from probably 1,000 a month in commissions to about 30 grand a month in commissions within 1 year. Okay. So you're talking about 20 years ago. So making 350, 400 grand in a year, 22 years ago is a little bit different than it is now, right? As a W-2 rep, right? And then every year I kept itching up. I think probably by 2000, so that was 2000. By 2008, that was the first year I made over $1 million in commissions in 1 year working for a company. Then 2012, I got up over 2 million a year in commissions. Now, I was in 4 different industries. I didn't make that all in the same industry. I just wanted to clarify that, right? And then I think at the peak of my career, which is probably 2014, I got up to about $3 million a year in straight commissions. No salary, unfortunately. Nobody wanted to pay me a salary. In fact, I actually negotiated straight commissions in every sales job I got. Even if they offered a base, I said, I don't want a base. You're just going to pay me more per sale. Of course. See, when you have,
I think that's a smart way to go. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So the years that you did $2 million. So let's go in between. It's easy to pick the most profitable years, and it's easy to pick the least profitable years. I want to go right in the middle to $2 million. Were you doing the same thing to go from 2 million to $4 million in sales commission, or was there something that you learned that was a major foundational shift for you? Like,
Yeah.
you had, let's say that there are 11 things, right? And that $1 million, of the 11 things, you had 7 things.
Yeah.
And at $2 million, you had 9 of 11, right?
Yeah.
So
I love
what did you do? What did you do to add those things?
One big thing I started getting a lot better at was asking what are called consequence questions. Those are called NEPQ consequence questions. Now, consequence questions help your prospect question their way of thinking that's allowed their situation to stay the same. So I think as I kept developing NEPQ, I just got better at really focusing on different parts of the sales process. And, hey, when you're making a couple $1 million a year in commissions, you're probably doing decent, but how do you go from 2 million a year to 3 million a year? Yeah. I started learning just little nibbits. It's like baseball. I always subscribe selling to baseball and softball, right? How do you go from, let's say you're batting 330 batting average, which is really, really good, right? Especially if you're in the pros, you're in the Hall of Fame. But how do you go from like a 330 batting average to, let's say, 380 or 400? It's little tweaks, right? You don't change your whole stance. It's just little tweaks. So in sales, it's the same thing. It's little tweaks. I would figure out there'd be certain words maybe that I was saying that I would notice would cause my prospects to resist. Maybe, I'll give you an example. I started doing this in my last, one of my last sales careers, my third industry. I was in B2B sales, and I'd present a lot of times to boardrooms. Okay. And there'd be 7, 8, 9, sometimes 12 people in a boardroom. Okay. And most of them had decision-making authority, or they at least influenced the buying decision. Okay. Early on, because I would only have met with maybe 2 or 3 of those people before I got into that boardroom. So you're talking 7, 8 people I've never met, didn't know exactly what the problem was, didn't know all that.
Right.
And so I started noticing, and I started really paying attention a lot more later on in my career to body language when I could see people. Okay. And let's say I'm going over a slide and I notice Gretchen down at the end of that table who I've never met. I show a slide and I notice her body language shifts and she starts to look up and she's like this, that type of facial expression. Before, I might let that pass and just keep going. But then I got smart. I'm like, something's going on in her mind that's triggered uncertainty. So I'd stop the meeting and very politely I'd be like, hey, Gretchen, when I went over that last slide where we were talking about X, Y, and Z, you seemed maybe a bit hesitant. Can you tell me what's behind that just so I understand? Yeah, when you went over there, I wasn't understanding this. Okay, well, in that case, and then I would go back and just see, that's a little tweak, right? Because maybe Gretchen was the one person in there that didn't understand that something that was uncertain. And I left that room and she starts unselling everybody else that's sold in there. Okay. So I lose control of that sales process and I lose that deal because maybe she's not a decision maker, but maybe she's a major influencer. Maybe she's afraid that with my solution, it's going to weed her out or make her look bad to the boss. So then she starts saying all the negative things about it. So little tweaks like that help me go from 2 million a year in commissions to 3 million a year, just as an example.
Did you debrief every single sale? So I noticed there's a trait amongst really successful people, whether it's Michael Jordan breaking down game film, or it's Tom Brady looking at film himself after the game. After I'm assuming, of course, when you got the sale, you knew your sales pitch was successful, obviously. But the ones that were the least successful, even at $2 million in commissions that were racking up month over month.
Yeah.
Did you debrief these presentations to see kind of where you had to?
Yeah, and I don't want you to think it's, it's not just in the presentations. The sales really won or lost in the discovery part of the process most of the time, just so everybody knows. It's not like, especially it's not won or lost at the close. Like the prospect, when you use an option close at the end, when do you want to take delivery? Wednesday at 1 or Thursday at 5? That's not when the prospect decides just because you ask them when they want to take delivery. If they say yes, that means they already decided earlier from the sales conversation they were going to buy. They didn't just be like, oh, he's asked me when delivery, I'm sold Thursday at 4. That's what most salespeople think, that the sales won or lost. When you ask a closing question, nothing could be further from the truth. So I would debrief it, and I would do it in a way most salespeople blame who when they don't make a sale? The prospect, the lead.
Yeah.
I always looked at myself. What did I say? What did I not ask? What did I miss from that prospect that triggered uncertainty in their mind that caused them, even though they had all these problems that I helped them find, and they really wanted to get to this objective, my solution would get them there. They have problems. My solution solves those. So what went wrong with me? So as a sales,
it reminds me of Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
Remember the scene? Have you ever seen Breaking Bad?
I know what you're talking about. I've seen some episodes, not the whole thing.
So there's a scene in Breaking Bad after Hank discovers that Walter White is essentially the meth king of New Mexico. They go out into the desert.
Yeah.
They drag Hank out into the desert. Walter White, they make him watch this. And then he's begging the cartel not to kill him, right? He's begging. And then he looks at him and he says, "You don't get it, do you?" He goes, "They already decided. It's not even like you can plead or say anything with them to change the result, right? They've already decided prior to them dragging him out of the car." So I just relate that to what you're saying about how people make decisions so early.
Yeah, I mean, we can always talk about the sales won or lost at hello. When we even have in one of our advanced sales training programs, it's called our Advanced Inner Circle. Every Wednesday, we have myself and a team of our sales trainers that break down recordings of our advanced clients for them. And they're always like, "Can you fast forward it to, 18 minutes and 36 seconds when I asked this question?" It seemed to go, I'm like, "We can, but I need to hear what was said in the first 2 minutes." Because typically, if I can hear what's going on in the first 2 minutes, that's going to tell me if you make the sale at the end or not, based on if you're either triggering to let their guard down or they become open, or you're triggering the wall of resistance. I already know why your question at the 18-minute mark went south, because the first 2 minutes you triggered so much sales resistance, they emotionally shut down. See, it's a downstream issue, and most salespeople don't think that. So I would always think to myself, what did I not ask? What did I not say? And when you take responsibility as a salesperson or a business owner, if you're selling that way, and you start to look at yourself, that's when you make major improvements. When you blame your prospects, oh, they have a limited mindset. They're all broke. They just have fear. Well, no shit, Sherlock. It's your job as a professional salesperson to help them overcome the fear, to help them overcome the fear of getting the money. That's why you should get paid a ton of money it's your job to do that. So when you blame the prospect, you're just going to lose more deals because you don't take any responsibility for your lack of sales ability. That's usually what it comes down to. And when you understand you have a lack of sales ability, will you go out and change that by learning more advanced sales ability? It's that simple.
Brilliant. That makes a lot of sense. And it's very strategic. And I think one of the things I appreciate about what you're saying, what you have said, and you've said from the beginning, is you've had this mind to a lot of sales. So a lot of salespeople I've noticed. So I run a manufacturing firm.
Yeah.
And the manufacturing firm, obviously, there's distribution. There's sales reps, manufacturers reps. There's a lot of stuff that happens around the country. A lot of sales individuals are, they're very emotional beings, and they let their personality lead the sale oftentimes because they believe in their raw power to just to almost metaphysically connect with the person across the aisle. Right. And one of the things I appreciate about your method is that it's slightly more. It's much less metaphysical than that, but it's way more analytical, which is to me makes a huge difference
Yeah.
in being able to overcome not just obstacles, but to correct what's broken with the sales process.
Yeah, because what you just described to me is the majority of salespeople go out and wing it. They personality sell based on their emotions.
Yeah.
And one
Yeah.
week they'll have a decent week, but then the next week they're down, right? And I don't know why, because their emotions control everything because they lack the skill level, right? So many salespeople believe that, they can listen to motivational, rah stuff. And I love that stuff, like for personal development, like
Right.
personal growth, but that doesn't help you sell more. I hate to tell everybody this. When your prospect answers the phone or you meet them in person, whatever you're doing, B2C or B2B, and you don't understand the right questions to ask, you don't understand how to use your tone to get them to let their guard down, you're just going to get punched in the face. All that motivational stuff you're listening to, journaling, metaphysical stuff, I love it, but it's not going to cost the prospect to want to change their situation. Your words that you use, the questions that you ask, your tone, and how you use that and deliver your questions gets the prospect to want to change and purchase. Has nothing to do with getting pumped up before a sales call. I see so many salespeople that listen to that stuff all the time that are completely broke just because they lack the sales ability, which is much different than just mindset. Because but here's what sales ability does, Micah. The right sales ability that makes you a lot of sales increases your confidence, right? It increases your mindset. I mean, think about a neurosurgeon. Does a neurosurgeon need to get pumped up to go in to do a successful brain surgery? No. They have a process that they follow that gives them a predictable result. As a sales professional, you want a structured sales process that sounds human, not scripted, okay, that sounds natural, but the right questions, the right time, the right tone that gives you a predictable process. So when you use it, even if there's a sale or two you miss, the next one is just coming right around the corner, right? You're not having to play the numbers game and go through 100 people just to make a couple of sales. I'd rather, talk to 4 people to make 2 or 3 sales, right? So if you have that predictable process, like a neurosurgeon, it increases your confidence because you can get pumped up all the time. But I hate to tell everybody this, if you keep getting rejected and objections and not making any sales, all that motivational stuff is going to leave your mind very, very quickly. I can tell you.
Yeah, it's so funny how the spectrum of emotion in the sales process, you can be on level 10 and then you come back down level 2 real quick within a couple of days. So in EPQ, your methodology of selling is so the essence is it only starts with not even allowing the prospect to build their wall up, and then go ahead. And then I just want to kind of flush out more. So you're preventing that person from even putting the wall up from the beginning, as you explained earlier. But there's obviously more that you have to build on
for sure.
With just not letting them put the wall up. And so where do you go from there?
Well, there's certain questions. So, you're going to learn what are called connection questions. Connection questions take the focus off you, put it on the prospect. After we get through with connecting questions, we're going to move into the next part of the sales process in that same call. This could be within 2 minutes, into what are called situation questions. Now, situation questions help you and the prospect find out what their real situation is. Most prospects don't understand what their real situation is when you first start talking to them, right? They might have an idea, but they don't understand the depth of the situation, right? They don't understand what the real problems are, why they have the problems, the consequences if they don't do anything about solving the problems. So you have to help them see what the real situation is, because before you can build a gap to where they want to be, you can't build that gap if they don't even know where they're at, right? And most prospects don't understand where they're at completely when you first start talking to them, okay? So then after that, we're going to move into what's called problem awareness questions. That builds the gap. What are the real problems? Why do they have the problem, like the root cause? And how are the problems affecting them even personally? Then we're going to move into solution awareness questions. Solution awareness questions get them to see and feel what their future is going to look like once all these newfound problems that your question ability has allowed them to see they have. We call that their objective state. Then we're typically, after they feel what the future is going to look like, once the newfound problems are solved that they didn't know they had, 20 minutes before they talk to you. You're then going to rip that away from them by asking a consequence question that gets them to defend themselves on why they need to change their situation now and not later. Okay, what are the ramifications if you don't do anything about this, though? See, that's more of a skeptical conversation, but they're emotionally involved at that time. I can't ask that question in the first 2 minutes because they're not emotionally involved yet, right? And then if you're in B2C, you're either going to transition into your presentation if it's a one-call close. If it's B2B, you're more of a complex sound environment, you're going to transition into the next step. Could be the next step demo, next step meeting with the department head, next step, meeting with the board, just whatever the next step is in your sales process. Okay. And then we're going to ask what are called commitment questions. I don't like the word closing. Commitment questions that get them to commit to take the next step and purchase what you're offering so they get what they want. So that's kind of NEPQ in a basic overview there.
Now, commitment questions, is this the same strat? So legacy salespeople, as you know, of course, is get them to say yes a million times. Is that are commitment questions related to that aspect of the close, or is it more seeing them as a customer of yours?
Well, okay, so let me give you a difference. So traditional selling will teach you, I've read a lot of books. I've read over 1,300 books in the last 22 years on sales, persuasion, influence, listening to them in the car or reading them, okay? Mm-hmm. Most of those books, just so you know, will say, you got to get the prospect to say yes 7 times. And if you get them to say yes 7 times in your presentation, they're likely to purchase by 71.23%. Did you know there's no study that actually shows that? That is literally copy and pasted from a sales trainer from the 1940s that started saying that. And every person has been copying and pasting that and putting it in their books. There literally is nothing that proves that. I hate to tell everybody that. I know it sounds good, but you're like, I got them to say yes 12 times and they still didn't buy. What's going on? Well, because there's no evidence that actually shows that. So a commitment question is more like leaning in and like, do you feel like this could be the answer for you? That verbal positive. That's a commitment question. Do you feel like this could be the answer for you? Yeah, I do. Hold on. Why do you feel like it is? Or what specific aspects that we went over do you feel are really going to help you guys the most? Well, I like this and I like that. See, that's an example of commitment questions. I get them to commit to take the next step. Just a random example there.
Yeah, no, I think it's smart. Definitely you want your prospective customers to giving them a day in the life of what it's like to kind of be with your company, to experience the difference between what you have and what they currently have or they don't have is a really important step to getting them to it's almost like they're committing to the experience before they even commit to you. The only hurdle is them obviously paying you for whatever it is that you provide.
Yeah, that would be after you went through your presentation, you brought up pricing, those type of things, and now you're committing them to take the next step and purchase what you're offering. Or if you're more of a B2B type of environment, you're asking commitment questions that lead to smaller commitments, right? Like the booking the next step demo. Those are micro commitments. So commitment questions take 2 forms. They're either, micro commitments that lead to the next big step of purchasing what you're offering, or they're actually, a commitment to purchase your solution then and there. Depends on if you're B2C or B2B.
What do you think about objections that relate to budget? So if we're going B2C to consumer, budget questions, I have to ask my husband, wife, whatever, those questions that set aside whatever you're selling on the shelf to a later time, just kind of giving them the expanded time to think about it. Why do those obstacles come up in your opinion?
You know why? I'll tell you why. Because you don't know how to build a gap. So if you don't know how to build a gap from where the prospect is compared to where they want to be, that means that gap is much smaller. And that means that problem isn't that big of a deal when they don't feel like there's much of a gap to where they want to be, right? So your question ability, once you learn an EPQ, we're not only going to teach you how to help the prospect find one problem, but now we're going to help you open them up enough where they find 2 or 3 or maybe 4 of their problems they didn't even realize they had, which builds what? A much bigger gap. And when you build a much bigger gap, what that does in a human being's mind is it causes way more urgency for them to want to change. The smaller the gap, the less urgency, the more objections. The bigger the gap, Heightened urgency, way less objections, just easier to sell. That's what causes those type of objections. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're never going to get those objections again. But if you do this the right way, you can literally prevent probably 50+% of the objections you're getting right now because you built such a big gap in their mind. And if they do give you an objection at the end, now because there's such a massive gap and they feel so much internal urgency to want to change their situation, it's much easier for you to help them overcome that concern because they see the end result and where they really want to be compared to where they're at. But if you can't get them there, they just don't see that. No urgency.
It's really an economics. It seems like a really economics problem. And when I say economics, I don't mean personal finance. That's not what I mean by an economics problem. What I mean is a hierarchy of values issue. I think is kind of what you're getting across, which is cost. So part of obviously economics is cost benefit analysis, right? So the differences between where is this trade-off is what you're selling. You talked about stacking the list of issues that are gonna come up against them if they don't choose you. And so by choosing you, the value of what you're selling, it seems like what you're saying the value continues to grow by how many problems are stacked on top of each other.
Yeah, because the more reasons they tell themselves why they need to change, the more likely it is for them to feel the urgency to change. The less reasons they tell themselves on why they need to change, the less likely they are to want to change. Now, here's how they do it. You can't tell them why they need to change because that's going to go in one ear out the other, right? You're biased. You're the salesperson. They know that. Your question ability allows them to tell themselves. And when the prospect tells themselves, it's true compared to you telling them, right? So it's almost like this question, Micah, like, which is more risky? Is it more risky for you to get the funding together? You get XYZ problem solved, you get XYZ end result. Or is it more risky for you to do nothing at all? The problems stay the same and nothing ever changes. Like, which is more risky? See, when they start to view that it's more risky to do nothing and the problems stay the same, that causes them to want to change their situation. Right. If that makes sense. That's almost a question you can even ask. Like if they say it's too expensive and you try to, and you find out what they mean by too expensive. And then you say, well, you tell me, like, which is more expensive? Is it more expensive for you to get the funding together? You get A problem solved, B problem solved, C problem solved, and you get XYZ result. Or is it more expensive for you to do nothing at all? The problems stay the same and nothing ever changes. Like, which is more risky or which is more expensive? Oh yeah, it's more expensive for me not to solve the problem. See, now obviously you're going to plug in those problems. You're not going to just say problem, but you want to plug in their problems because that makes it more real. So those type of questions get them to challenge their way of thinking that's allowed the problem to stay the same. Way easier to solve.
Let's talk. Yeah, I completely agree with you. To close out, I think what I want to do is I want to talk about, I want you to talk about your program and how people can contact you. We're going to do that in a minute. But before we do that, I want to talk about some myths like that persist in sales. I think I lost.
Hey, Micah,
can you still hear me?
Yeah, Micah, 1 second. Hold on.
Yep, no problem.
Guys, I lost my camera. Guys. Something's going on with the camera. I don't know. We lost it. Some bad connection.
I have Jeremy is experiencing some minor difficulties. So I have something just for this situation, which is some nice elevator music.
Yeah.
Micah, can you take me out and so I can try to get the camera back on?
Sure. All right. So if you're listening to this, Jeremy's having he has some technical difficulties right now, but we were really about to dig into some of the sales myths that salespeople and entrepreneurs have when it comes to selling. This is one of the foundational pieces of this interview because oftentimes people believe what they're doing on a regular basis is actually good for their sales process, and yet they have to adapt themselves to become, different to whoever they're speaking to. But I think one of the things that so far I've gotten out of this interview with Jeremy is that what he's saying is that there are so many myths out there. Not necessarily myths, but there's so many sales paradigms out there that people have engaged in that have that essentially have taught people some of the wrong ways to try to get through to people, and they experience the backlash. I think Jeremy is all set now, so we're gonna bring him back up.
I've just got a couple minutes. Thanks for your patience. We lost the camera. What were you going to ask me real quick, and we'll end it?
Yeah, no worries. So I just wanted to touch on, so one of the cornerstones of this interview, I think, foundational pieces are sales myths for entrepreneurs and salespeople. Like, what to you are some of the we talked about the saying yes a million times thing, but
Sure.
What are some of the pervasive myths that you see?
There's a lot, but one of the biggest myths you want to stay away from is a lot of sales trainers will be like, just be really excited when you talk with your prospects. Show them your enthusiasm, show them how much you believe in the product, and they're going to believe in the product. Right. I hate to tell everybody nothing could be further from the truth. I'm just going over what the data shows. In fact, I'm not saying being negative or be boring or not believe in your product. You want to believe in your product or service, but you got to keep that internal, because the moment the prospect feels that you are just there you're really excited to sell them something, is the moment they emotionally shut down. And the main reason is because they're constantly being marketed and sold to 24 hours a day, pretty much 7 days a week. Power of the internet, especially social media, because of this newfound power that the consumer has, they'll no longer be manipulated or pressured or pushed, because they know they have many choices to choose the exact product or service that you're offering. So typically within the first 7 to 12 seconds of any conversation you're in, just so everybody knows, your prospect subconsciously, we can't even help it as a human being, is picking up on your verbal and nonverbal cues based on your tone and what you were saying and asking, that causes their brain to react in one of two ways. So like I said, if you come across too excited, if you come across, which is really needy, think about all the salespeople that really are excited when they try to sell to you, how you react to that. You're like, oh, I'm so glad they're excited, I'm ready to buy. No, you're like, whoa, right? The wall comes up, right? So if your wall's coming up when salespeople act like that, imagine what they're doing when you're acting the same way. It just never made any sense to me. So basically what happens is when you come across, too enthusiastic, you come across attached, you come across needy, it triggers their brain to go into what's called fight or flight mode, where they try to get rid of you real quick, or they emotionally shut down, give you vague, generalized answers, and then at the end say, I want to think it over. And then they never buy, right? Once you go to an EPQ, we're going to, we train salespeople in every industry pretty much at this point, how to come across more neutral. When I say neutral, more unbiased, like you're not quite sure you can even help yet. In the beginning, you don't know enough, right? You come across more collective. Okay, that doesn't mean be boring. That means like you're assertive, but you're more collective, you're calm, and especially detached. It causes their brain to become curious enough where they want to engage. They want to open up because they feel like you might have something important, then they just might not know what it is yet. So that's a big myth you want to stay away from. Does that help?
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's awesome. And so, Jeremy, for those who are watching, I know that we're coming up on time here. How can they either enroll in your program, get in touch with your firm to try to bring on and learn some of these NEPQ methodologies of asking questions and essentially get themselves to the state where they can actually understand the nuance of question asking in sales?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have just like one training program. We have like 26 different training programs at this point. So the best thing for them to do is we'll give them some free hors d'oeuvres first. We won't even charge them. Just have them go to our free Facebook group. It's called salesrevolution.pro, salesrevolution.pro. I think we have like 56,000 people in there, sales professionals, coaches, consultants, entrepreneurs from every industry. And right when they join, just have them message me directly in there. And then somebody on my team will message them over. We'll give them a free training. We'll give them, we'll do this. We'll give them a course. It's a basic course. It's an NEPQ 101 mini course, just some different questions they can use for different situations they're going to be in. We'll give that to them for free. And we go live in that group, a couple times a week, different Q&As, different trainings. So have them start there. We'll give them some free hors d'oeuvres. And if they want, obviously more advanced training that like our clients are, they can just get a hold of us in there. And they can also purchase this book. It just got published today, which is crazy. So they can go to Barnes & Noble. So if they go to Barnes & Noble's website and they type in the new model of selling, I don't know if you can see that, new model of selling.
Yep, we can see that.
Selling to an Unsellable Generation with Jerry Acuff and I. they can order that book straight from Barnes and Noble website. We put in a lot of effort in that book, and we made it very tactical, meaning one of my biggest complaints about sales books, besides some other things, is it's all theory. They don't give you any training. Like you walk away, you're like,
Right.
what did I just read? So in this book, we gave tons of different examples of questions for different situations and different industry specific examples from like tons of different industries. So the reviews on this are already crazy because we've sold several thousands of these before it's even published today, pre-orders. So if they just go to Barnes and Noble's website, have them purchase the physical copy from Barnes and Noble, that book is going to give them a good start into NEPQ if they want to sell more for sure.
Amazing. Yeah,
Okay.
no, I'm definitely looking forward to sharing those links and getting them into some of those courses. I think, the reason why I started this podcast was to help people who are listening to assetize their business. And, when we think about assets, we think typically about real property and rental property. We don't think that our business is going to be income producing assets, meaning they become passive. You don't have to go into them all the time. But by having a good sales training program in the business whereby you can install systems, including sales training systems to your staff, you really do have a leg up on essentially everyone else. And you can create a business that's just passive for you.
Yeah, you learn the sales process, you'll scale your company no matter where you're at. You don't learn sales the right way, very hard to scale. It's really sales. You're right. Perfect.
I agree with you.
Thanks for having me on.
Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate all the insights that you share with us. And I look forward to having you next on again, because I did want to dig in a little bit more into more of the new generation of selling, because people are definitely interacting differently with trying to, buy things today. And I wanted to kind of like talk about that. So I'll schedule another time.
Yeah. And that book we talk a lot about that. Probably 30% of that book is all about what you just said.
Amazing. Yeah, that's what gave me the idea. Jeremy.
Thanks, Martha.
Jeremy Miner, everyone. He's an incredible salesman, obviously 7-figure sales trainer. That guy is a rock star. He knows his stuff. It was an absolute honor to have him on. And whenever you can get someone who's good at sales on to the podcast and that can give you some ideas about how you should sell and to kind of have you thinking about which way you can interact with your prospects, it's always a good time. Well, thank you for tuning in today to the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video, because when you like the video, it helps people to find us more. And if you're listening to this on audio, don't forget to share and subscribe to the podcast with everyone else. Don't forget to go to the commonsenspodcast.com website so that you can check out our new blog that we have. And I look forward to talking to you next time. Remember, if you don't go to work on your business, you're going to go to work on building somebody else's. Talk to you later. Bye.